Code usage rates is interesting. Employees' usage of codes of conduct showed varying rates across geographic areas and industries. Employees in India, China, and Australia, interestingly, have the highest usage rates of their code of conduct. 47% for India, 40% for China, and 38% for Australia. And they reported using the code of conduct as a resource, quote unquote, very often. Interestingly, 35% of employees in the Netherlands reported not consulting the code of conduct at all.
Global companies face unprecedented risks and challenges in today's economy. To mitigate these legal and economic risks, companies are rapidly embracing and elevating the importance of robust ethics and compliance programs to promote positive corporate citizenship. On Corruption, Crime, and Compliance, you'll hear from industry leaders and insiders about how to create effective ethics and compliance programs that will mitigate risks and maximize financial performance. Here's your host, Michael Volkov.
Well, hello, this is Michael Volkov, and we're here for another Corruption, Crime, and Compliance episode. In today's episode, we're going to talk about LRN's recent report on codes of conduct. And as you all know, if you follow my blog and my podcasts, I'm a big fan of LRN's work, and they consistently provide high-quality reports and important insights on ethics and compliance trends. Each year, their program effectiveness report is anticipated as an important source of cutting-edge ethics and compliance initiatives. And LRN's most recent Code of Conduct report is just another in these line of important studies to look at. And it includes a number of important benchmarks for companies to use as a measure of their compliance programs. In its most recent report, LRN cites a number of important findings relating to a company's code of conduct. What are people doing with their codes of conduct? And I think this is a great report because, look, your code of conduct is your foundation. It's the foundation of every ethics and compliance program and your culture. It is a document that should be publicized, accessible, monitored for what people are clicking on there, what they're looking at, should be cited for its values and principles, and promoted as an essential tool for company actors to embed a culture of ethics and compliance. So let's take a look at some of the highlights from LRN's report. And I will say this, I remember the story about, I heard of one CEO who actually walked around carrying the code of conduct and referred to it at times during meetings. So this is why this document is so important. And we've seen a lot of changes, I think, from, these 50-page lengthy codes of conduct down to something that's shorter, more accessible, and more useful, I think, in the end. Instead of creating a legal tome, it becomes a leadership tome, and a tome that also gets at your values and principles and the way that you operate your business and what you believe in. So let's talk about code of conduct innovations. This is one of the highlights. With industry innovations and government support, organizations have moved away, just like I was saying, from lengthy legalistic codes of conduct to digital PDFs and even web-based codes of conduct. Well, I'm seeing and hearing more about web-based codes of conduct. And many organizations have promoted the accessibility of their codes with strong statements of ethical principles and values while presenting colorful, shorter, and targeted guidance on legal and ethics compliance on specific issues, specific areas. Since some companies, like I said, are even adopting a web-based code of conduct and tracking interactions with the code to measure engagement, issues of interest, how much clicks are on certain areas, and enhanced accessibility. Web-based access to codes of conduct stretches even to mobile phone accessibility. But what's interesting is despite these innovations, what people are aware of and sort of they hear about what their colleagues are doing or see other companies doing, the LRN report notes that employees are resisting the use of these innovative capabilities. Specifically, the LRN report noted that employees surveyed are 1.7 times more likely to prefer to view their code as a PDF on their computer as opposed to a web-based or mobile experience. And that to me is kind of interesting. I expected people to embrace, let's do it on the internet, but people like their PDF, I guess, of a document. But I think it's a shorter document and it's a more accessible, like language wise and presentation wise. It's more captivating and colorized and things like that to make it more pleasing for people to look at. Code usage rates is interesting. Employees' usage of codes of conduct showed varying rates across geographic areas and industries. Employees in India, China, and Australia, interestingly, have the highest usage rates of their code of conduct. 47% for India, 40% for China, and 38% for Australia. And they reported using the code of conduct as a resource, quote unquote, very often. Interestingly, 35% of employees in the Netherlands reported not consulting the code of conduct at all. Very interesting. Now, China and India had the highest percentage of employees reporting that they received training on their company's code of conduct. China, 97% of their employees, and in India, 91% reported that they received training on their company's code of conduct. Whereas, obviously, the Netherlands had the lowest percentage for this question at 64%. And this leads to the logical conclusion that training on the code is a huge factor in making it a usable document that employees will refer to repeatedly. Now, with respect to organization type, government and nonprofit organizations admitted to using their code of conduct only 50% and 54% respectively. So 50% by government and 54% by nonprofit organizations, which is surprising to me because I would have thought nonprofits would be looking at their codes a little bit more. Now let's talk about a couple of other issues that came up. There was one about leadership, and the LRN report uncovered a significant gap between the perceptions and attitudes around the code of conduct by senior leaders versus middle management and frontline managers, individual contributors. More than 8 out of 10 senior leaders say they use the code as a resource and believe leaders follow the code. This compares with about 7 in 10 middle managers and 6 in 10 frontline managers, individual contributors, who say they use the code as a resource. So that's interesting that the heaviest usage occurs at the highest level. And that to me indicates that we still have middle and lower management issues with regard to embracing the code and in making that a part of their job function and in the way that they interact with their employees. A similar pattern occurred across the levels of leadership and perceived compliance rates. 90% of senior leaders believe leaders in their organization follow the code of conduct. This compares to 81% of middle managers and only 69% of frontline managers and individual contributors. So we observe similar gaps when asked if their manager talks about the code of conduct. 88% of senior leaders believe that occurs, 74% of middle managers, and only 58% of frontline managers, individual contributors, perceive that. Now, the LRN report confirmed what everyone suspects with regard to the generational divide that we talk about these days, and the generational divide among employees. In a prior report, LRN cited the fact that Gen Z employees are 2.5 times more likely to agree that it's okay to bend the rules if needed to get the job done, compared to work colleagues in the boomer generation. And that was a prior report finding, which was really, I think, surprised a lot of people. And what's interesting, though, is with regard to the generational divide, this current study found that Gen Z employees reported consulting their codes of conduct more than baby boomers. Indeed, baby boomers are the least likely employee generation to use their code of conduct as a resource. Only 42% reported doing so. Now, this could reflect the fact that baby boomers may rely on prior experience and in judgment rather than consulting the code of conduct for specific guidance. But it makes you wonder as to why Gen Z employees are looking at their codes of conduct at such a high level when prior studies or prior surveys show that they're more likely to break the rules or bend the rules to get a job done. Okay, one last topic. This is a short episode, but I did want to go through the LRN report a little bit in terms of some of the highlights. I'd take a look at it if you get a chance to read through it. It's a terrific report. One last issue on hybrid working. And the LRN report confirms that employees strongly support hybrid working arrangements as quote unquote the sweet spot. The flexibility between face time and avoidance of commuting time was universally praised by employers and employees. Hybrid employees maintain the highest rate of engagement with a company's code of conduct. Terrific, interesting. And people always worry that, with people working at home, working from home, they're less engaged. And this shows you that they're actually more engaged. So that's a very interesting finding from the LRN report. All right, folks, that was just a quick episode, but just wanted you to hear a little bit about the LRN report. We'll see you next week for another episode of Corruption, Crime, and Compliance.
If you enjoyed this episode, the best way to support the show is by subscribing on your favorite listening platform. To learn more and connect with Michael Volkov, go to volkovlaw.com.